Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at prototype cards from the late 80s, early 90s, and how they morphed into the actual cards that would be released. And prototypes were a very unique thing for this time period, basically during the junk wax era, during that explosion of card companies different card companies coming into existence. The thing about this era, the reason why there were so many prototype cards was because this was that magical time where the card industry was going from a sleepy little space that just wasn't well crafted into an area of unbelievable crowding of companies. In 1987, there were only 4 companies making cards. By 1992, football alone, who in 1988 only had 1.5 cards card sets that were made, by 1992 there were 14 companies making cards. So I'm not even counting all the different sets. So that means that Bowman, Stadium Club, Pinnacle, Ultra, Platinum, those don't even count. 14 different companies were making cards. And when you consider that, that's basically just 4 years where this explosion happened. That's pretty profound. And so during this very chaotic time, there was a big need early on for card companies to be able to come into an area that just wasn't ready for them and introduce themselves and prepare themselves with the innovations they were making, and then to kind of introduce themselves to a card market as well. But all of that got hammered out. So by 1992, the card industry was so well built, it didn't need to deal with prototypes. Promos, on the other hand, that was a big thing. And so promos are a whole nother space. But with prototypes, there were only a couple of cases of really distinct prototypes that really do fit in this discussion. So while I'm not going to talk about every single prototype, these are pretty common ones that were released widely enough that they work as pretty good examples of where an idea came from and where they went to. And a prototype is basically a working copy. It's not quite finished. So that's the thing. We get to see kind of the final steps usually toward an actual final result of a card. And I'm not going to be doing this entirely in chronological order because the best place to start is what may be the most iconic of the prototype cards, which is the 1989 or 88-89 Upper Deck prototype cards. And these cards, there were 2 players, 3 cards of each. The main difference between these is it really does come down to the holograms. So I'm only going to show you one, and that's going to suffice for everything we need here. But in the case of this prototype, the card front is very similar. In fact, it's almost identical. The only true difference that comes into play is the logo for the company, Upper Deck. They notched the corner up in the top to allow the diamond for Upper Deck to fit. And in case you haven't noticed, the diamond in Upper Deck is actually a baseball diamond. It's the infield within the bases. And it is propped up in a diamond shape, and the text goes along in a horizontal fashion to orient the design. But for the prototype card, they notched the corner so that they could take that and tilt it so that the edge, the first and second, second and third base paths were now the upper corner of the card, which was a really cool effect. Had they made it a little bit bigger, it really would have read well, and I love that little component. I hate to say it, but it was right for the card for them to take that down and move it down to the bottom corner and just have it float there, because the thing is, the card is not an overall good design. It has a lot of good qualities, a lot of good components in terms of how it's built, and then down at the bottom it's like they just kind of ran out of time and just said, I don't know, throw the name down there. And that big white patch down at the bottom required something, so they put the logo down there to fill space, which is a shame because they could have put the logo for the team, they could have put the position. There are a lot of things they could have done with it. Instead, they took the logo and put it down there. So because the front of the card is essentially a train wreck, they couldn't make the really cool move, which was to have the 45-degree oriented logo up in the corner. But that's minor potatoes. That's really not that big of a deal. The key is the back of these cards. That's where this card really does show its difference. And the most obvious component is the hologram itself. Now, this is not the biggest hologram that they used on these prototype cards, but regardless, it's way too big. The whole idea that they wanted was to really show you this big hologram and show off the hologram, but you don't need a big hologram because that's not the point of the card. In fact, you're going to have a 700 to 800 card set of all of these players. That's way too many holograms. You just don't need to worry about that big hologram. All you need is a little diamond, which is what they went with, and it made it so much better. Little tiny space with just enough space to read the hologram is perfectly fine. Big improvement. But that's the improvement, and that's really, at the end of the day, the only way that the card overall truly got better. Because the big problem on the card back is the text box on the side. I love the way that the prototype has it smaller and floating, allowing the image to really take up the whole space while the player is still focused on one side. What they went with was they expanded it to make it more readable. True, I grant them that. But by doing that, they crowded out the card, and it doesn't have the free-flowing nature, and the image doesn't feel as big as it otherwise would. So Upper Deck, it took years and years for Upper Deck to finally figure out how to make a good card back. This was the start of a really unfortunate legacy, and I don't think it started well. I wish that they had done a better job of working with the smaller text and just letting that work. But regardless, this is what they started off with this prototype, and they ended up with this final result, which was not a huge change, but still you can see some of the change. Now, in the same year, you also had Pro Set that was kicking off in football. And with Pro Set, they were using the score model. It's almost like they were making the score set for football, which they couldn't entirely do because Score went and made the score set for football. But the design is very similar to what they had done in Score. A lot of the same components come into play. They do have multiple colors throughout the set in series, but not in 110 card blocks. They have color combinations that play into it, so they very much were thinking in that line. And it's ironic that they made a more Score card than Score did, ultimately. But you don't really see the Score in it unless you're trying to see it. And once you do, you realize, oh yeah, that's totally what they did. So the design doesn't change a whole lot. One of the biggest components that they changed was they moved the NFL shield from one side of the card to the other, which, okay, now it is interesting they have an NFL shield because I think only Philadelphia, I think that was the only other case where we had seen an NFL shield on a card, but that was an important part of Pro Set because Pro Set was not built by the NFL, it was not built for the NFL, it was built with the NFL. The NFL literally asked for this set to be created, and so the card is perfectly intertwined in the NFL to the extent that it basically is like a promotional tool for the NFL. So of course the NFL logo is going to go up there. But more importantly, they took the Pro Set, that old Pro Set writing, which was only done in 1989, they took that off and they put the conference logo, which makes the card so much better. It really does make the top of the card work beautifully. And for the Pro Set logo, there is none. It's just a little footnote down at the bottom of the card, which means that this card is all focused on being all about the player. And then they also changed a little bit of the color boxes up at the top, which is the thing that stands out the most. But ultimately, they refined it, pulled back some of the tricks, and made the card front a lot better. But that's the card front. Now, the card back is a whole nother conversation. The card back is where you can really see that they were trying to make Score cards for the NFL. Or more correctly, they were using Score as their model. Because the card back looks like the Score card, except it is larger. They're not trying to cram as much stuff in there, which is perfectly fine. But it is very distinct to look at this prototype card and see that, because here it looks obvious. When they went to do their actual card back, I mean, it's almost like there's no relationship between them. And I'm so glad that they did this, because the 89 Pro Set card is not truly one of the great card backs of all time, but it's in the running because it set up some of the greatest card backs that would ever be made, because it laid out the template for companies, including Pro Set, to build off of. But for 1989, this is hands down the best card back. What they were able to achieve is the kind of thing where you're just looking, trying to figure out how did they even come up with it. And you can see the thread because Score had all the pieces. They hadn't figured out how to refine the card back. And that's what Pro Set did. They refined it in part by rotating it sideways and making it tremendously better. But the card set that Pro Set really redefined the card industry with was the next set in 1990. And to get to a card as truly innovative, and when I say innovative, I mean there have been only a handful, if that many, card designs that have been, for their time, as innovative as the half-bleed cards that Pro Set released in 1990. How did they get here? What was the stair step from the very archaic, at the end of the day, 89 set versus the very, very cutting-edge 1990 design? And they actually had a 5-card test set that they created. And these 5 cards are all of Randall Cunningham, so you get to see them playing around with some ideas. 3 of the cards all have borders. You have essentially black, you have a charcoal, well, not really a charcoal, but a mid-tone gray, and then a light gray, or silver. So these are the 3 fronts, and the borders are weird to look at because they look super cheap. But what obviously stands out is that box, the floating box with the Pro Set logo. Again, the 1989 logo, which is interesting that they were hanging on to it this long, and then either with the name or without. The one without was an interesting move because by 1991 we would start to see this used in a number of card sets. But here in 89 they're just playing around with that. But these 3 also had different card backs that were all the same card back with a different color patch at the top, which aligned with the card front. I don't know that they were going to think of doing team colors at this point, because why wouldn't you do that already with the team that Randall Cunningham played for, which was the Eagles? They didn't bother, so I don't know why. But at any rate, the 3 colors, I mean, they all have a different feel, but at the end of the day, it's that weird white border around the outside. It feels wrong. Even though that was part of the 89 card set, with this card, it doesn't work well because everything is so bold inside, and it really wants to be more. And the other 2 cards provide us with more of where they were going, because the card fronts for the other 2 are full bleed. And you get to see one with the horizontal strip and the other one with the no name that's more of a vertical box. The card backs, however, are both the same, and here they use the conference team color at the top, almost like a Pro Bowl card. It looks a lot better because of the fact that it spans all the way to the border, and yet at the same time it doesn't look as good because there's still a border everywhere else, and so the border gets cut off and you just have a big box at the top. It's kind of a weird mix, but what's really weird about these cards is they all look like they're test cards for the 89 set, because when you look at this versus the 1990 card, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, you look at the fronts, and with the fronts you go, okay, how in the world did they go from no border or a box border to the brilliant concept of the team colors? And the thing about the team colors is they work beautifully to really bring the player out. It gets you in the theme of the team, and then it works as a mat so that the colors of the player stand out. Not as much for the Jets and the Eagles because the grass is also green, but that's basically what the front does. And it has the great NFL logo that they came up with for 1990. But the card backs, see, this is where it just, you almost wonder how they came up with the card back, because the test cards are basically the 89 card back they're trying to gussy up. The 1990 card back is just, they threw it completely out the window. But then again, the card front and the card back are perfect combinations. One is the same as the other with a different theme of either a picture or the stats. And when you look at the test cards, they weren't thinking about that at all. So this is a weird test set simply because it's almost like they tested it and everybody just said no, no, no across the board. Go as far away from here as you can. And they did. And what they came up with was a truly, truly legendary set. But in 1990, that wasn't the most distinct card of that year. That goes to Action Packed, because it's a 3D card, as in it's actually got relief on it. It's a card that even to this day is just, it's almost without parallel. Well, Action Pack didn't start in 1990. In 89, they had their test set, but by what I say by test set, that's not a prototype set. That is a test run of the final product. So their prototype card was in 88, only it was actually in 87. Originally, Action Pact wanted to make baseball cards, so they made test cards. They made a prototype set to send out to the Major League Baseball to say, look, this is the product we'd like to make. Will you give us a license? And as Major League Baseball was wont to do, they said no. In fact, it's kind of amazing that Upper Deck even got the green light to join they were basically the last company to join Major League Baseball. Action Pact, this was 2 years before that. This was a year before Score. That's when these cards came out. And they have the relief and the same basic design that we would see by 1989, 1990. Except the biggest difference these cards have is that they're compact. They have a cracker-like quality to them, kind of a tinny quality in a way. Because of how tightly packed they are, they don't have a lot of relief. And the colors, there are color details in there that are very not vibrant at all. And the card back is, it's a vertical card back, which if you know Action Pact is very rare. And it almost has a Score-like quality. And remember, I just said, this came out the year before Score, so they were actually ahead of the game, even compared to Score when it comes to color on the back. Or they were kind of in line, doing the same thing at about the same time. Now, Score put a lot of more information on their card back, but still, this was the concept they had, and the Major League Baseball said no. So the next year, they made a run at the NFL. The NFL was all for opening the doors. So as the NFL was trying to get Pro Set going, and Score was coming into the NFL, Action Pact made a run of doing very similar cards, in this case only two, both New York Giants, and the cards are built in a similar way on the card front to the 87 baseball set. Here the colors are a little bit stronger, so the color approach that they have to the card front in terms of the details in the border, that works better. So the border looks good and the card feels a little bit better, but it's still pretty tight. But the card back is wildly different. They went with the horizontal card back that we're a lot more familiar with, because this was pretty much the way that they were going to be doing card backs for the next few years. And you might notice that on the football card, it actually has the space for the signature, which they don't have on baseball, only they do. The baseball card actually does have a white box for a signature. And it's almost impossible to see because the text box actually has an extremely light yellow color to it. And then there is a white area. It's not even a demarcated area. It's just a white area within the yellow that you don't even really notice, almost like they just assumed the autographs would go there and they figured, let's just make it a little bit better. Nobody will ever notice. And I may be the first person who's ever noticed that there's actually a box there for autographs. But when it came to football, they wanted to really outline where those autographs would go. And so they did. But when you look at the 88 prototype card versus the 89 test set card of Phil Simms, the cards look almost the same on the front. There's a little bit of a difference in terms of the color, but the card feel is different because by 89 they were making cards the way we would know them. Card back though, this is where you can really see the difference in the corners, the rounding of the corners. It's very distinct. The corners were very rounded in all the prototype cards, but in the regular set cards, they brought the corners out a lot more and made the cards almost square in a way. But I do like that the prototype card has a much better, much stronger text. It reads a lot better, and the picture I think is framed a little better. I like the team color around the picture. But other than that, this is one where they had a lot of progression, where they came up with the prototype cards, and then when it came time to figuring out how to make them, they actually did make a very large amount of change. But regardless, pretty cool. Now, in 1991, there was a prototype set for Pacific that's almost kind of cheating. It's really more of a promo set. There's not much of a change, but I figured I'd go ahead and talk about it anyways. Pacific, unlike Action Pact, Pro Set, and Upper Deck, Pacific had already been making sports cards for close to a decade, but more specifically, football cards, specifically Seahawks cards, for quite a few years. So they were already making cards. They just needed to expand it out into a whole set. So they were already in the flow. And so that meant that in developing their card set, well, they were used to it. They knew how to do it. And so the prototype cards are almost identical to what they would do in the main set. It's almost disappointing to see that, yes, they were still using those ridiculous colors that they used for the teams in the set. They were still using those here in this test set, or for the teams that did have the ridiculous colors. But regardless, as you can see from the card front, there's really not a lot of difference. On the card back, there's not much more difference, but the differences are pretty strong, because the big difference that you see is that the colors are inverted. Well, actually, they also have the card backs inverted, so that when you have the cards up front, you have to turn them in the opposite direction, which actually is something that you got to consider when you use cards, because when you take a card, when you flip it over, it has to flip in a certain way to make sense. Otherwise, it's all backwards, and it's not that it kills the experience as much as it can be a little bit annoying in the process. And so they needed to kind of refine that, I guess. But regardless, they did that. But the fact that they inverted the colors on this Bo Jackson card is kind of weird. Why? I don't know why they necessarily did this with this card, but it is something that jumps out. But the actual significant part about the difference is the card number. So they replaced the card number, the location of the number, with the team logo. Great move. And so that you understand, on the test card, or on the prototype card, no, that's not an error with Marcus Allen's jersey number. That is the card number that they were going to associate with Bo Jackson. So I think it's a big improvement to put the team logo there and then move the card number down at the very bottom of the card, where it makes a lot more sense and really does read well. But other than that, this prototype set was, like I said, Pacific already knew what they were doing, so they didn't need to worry about these prototype cards really having to change much. It's just refining a few little details, which is exactly what you want, ideally, to know that you're already on the right track. But the last one I want to talk about is kind of a prototype card, but it really is a promo card, which is for 1992 Collector's Edge. And the reason I wanted to talk about this card is simply because it's such an impressive difference that you see in terms of one simple detail, which is the color of the border. Now, these cards, in this case, these cards were from the John Elway dealership. It was a giveaway that they did there. And the cards, this isn't the only one. They did a couple of these, but they all had this incredibly strong, rich, vibrant blue color. And with the main set, I understand what they were trying to do with the main set. The black border with the light gold detailing on the inside, or the small gold detailing on the inside, is exactly right for the concept of the set, which was they wanted this card set to be super elite. I mean, it was made out of vinyl or plastic so that they couldn't get damaged. The idea was you're buying something that is really going to hold up over the years. They limited the production to 100,000 or so. They were destroying the printing plates. I mean, the whole process was built around this is going to be super expensive because it's super rare. To the extent that this is the first card where they put protectors in the packs between the cards. Every single card was separated from every other card so they would not get damaged. You actually had protectors before Finest did it. Now, Topps was developing Finest at the time, but it wasn't released. This was the card set that was released where they really built this to be a truly elegant card set, and the design was built around that. The problem is the cards don't have much punch. They don't really stand out. They're nice cards if you take the time to look at it, but it doesn't have vibrance. Whereas if you look at the prototype cards, or these promo cards, the blue it'd be a little bit much for an entire set, but it really captures your eye and it makes the whole card come alive. But the thing about this card that's most distinctive on the front is the fact that it's a glossier card finish, except the background behind John Elway, which is a matte finish, which means that he stands out. His colors are more vibrant and the card has a spectral effect in the light, whereas the background behind him kind of fades back a bit. Action Pact had done this in 1991, and here they were doing it with the Collector's Edge promo card, and had they done that in the main set, it would have made the card so much more impressive, but they didn't. And on the card back, this is where I have to put my foot down and say, I think you should have gone with the blue, because it's still kind of overpowering, but the green, again, it was the right choice for what they were trying to do. It was not the right choice for what they ended up with. The card set was trying too hard to be something it could never quite be, and the blue card succeeded a lot more. But this is, I love the fact that you can look at these two cards and see how wildly different just this concept was in the card, how they read so differently. But other than that, there have been a few other prototype cards that have had pretty decent worth for discussion. I'm not going to get into them. I just wanted to go through this exploration. So I hope this was kind of informative to you. I hope that you liked seeing how the cards changed from one idea to another. Definitely subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out my other videos, and yeah, thank you very much for watching.